I'm trying to share my screen, but I don't think I've succeeded yet. Okay. All right. So as Catherine said, I have my team, Sneha and Ian, are just so fundamental and critical to this work. We have been doing this massive lift of taking the action effectiveness monitoring data and trying to put it into Tableau and put it in a situation where we can easily share it among all of the project sponsors and partners or anyone who is interested. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. Is everybody still there? I just got like disconnected. No, we're good. I hope we are good. Okay.
I think you're in, yeah.
Okay, sorry. All right. So thank you. I also just want to thank the research partners. You know, we do not do this. We work in a vacuum. We don't have, you know, 8 million data points because I personally collected them. That is absolutely not true. Everyone is contributing to this work, and you're either contributing it by being a partner, by collecting the data, by funding the data collection. And I feel so incredibly grateful, and I know my team does, that we can talk about monitoring data. So many programs don't have monitoring, and the fact that we do and that we have a really robust program, I think is really, I'm really grateful for that, and I hope to continue to improve that program with everyone's help. So I already mentioned this, but I'm going to be talking about the programmatic action effectiveness monitoring program. That's going to be a little bit for people who may not know what AIMR is. This is going to be posted online, so a little background there. I'm going to be talking briefly about the 2020 to 2021 results. And then I really like to encourage a group discussion about the ERTG revisits, but also a bigger question about, you know, what are we looking for project success? What are the metrics we need to monitor for project success? And if we are not connecting the dots, how can we do that better? So the Columbia Estuary Ecosystem Restoration Program, we affectionately call SERP, it has these really wonderful overarching objectives of increasing essentially the capacity and the quality of habitats in the tidal ecosystem of the Columbia River to essentially hold more salmon habitat and be a more productive ecosystem. And I think these are really wonderful goals, and I really hope that the AIMR data can help us essentially increase the capacity of doing this work. And so what data I'm going to talk about today are in the SERP program where there are 3 levels of data. And LSEP, or the Estuary Partnership, we assist with the collection of level 2 and level 3 data, and then the Army Corps leads the level 1 data. Level 1 data is very, very very specialized studies. And so for the level 2 data, that's data that we collect, habitat data. So it's specifically looking at plant community, soil development, macroinvertebrate community, and when we can afford to do so, we do spot checks for salmon and essentially fish occurrence. And this is really paired well with the level 3 data, which is data that is collected on every BPA funded project for restoration. And this is basic hydrology and sediment accretion and erosion data. There's also photo point data in there. And so these are on different schedule, but essentially thinking about, you know, essentially pre through year 5, if it's a level 2 data, you're getting intermittent habitat analysis. And then if it's, again, all those level 3 sites are getting years 1 through 5 data collection, and then year 10. And shockingly, a lot of sites are hitting 5 and 10 coming up. And so we're going to talk more about that going forward. So I will again say that we don't do this work in a vacuum. We have a lot of support, and I have some folks up here, especially, you know, outside of the LSEP team, we have April Silva and Narayan Elzamar from CREST. They're fundamental to doing all of this data collection. So what are the overarching questions I ask of the data when I'm thinking about it? Well, with that level 2 and 3 data, the large overarching question I have is, how are restoration sites developing over time compared to reference wetlands? You know, either it's a reference wetland or maybe it's a goal condition. Maybe your goal was to increase hydrologic connectivity or increase native plant community recovery. These are really common goals of restoration projects in the Lower Columbia. Of course, thinking about sediment and tidal channel hydraulics is also important, thinking about how those are recovering over time, natural processes, and then how all of this really feeds into developing more robust macroinvertebrate and salmonid food web dynamics. And as I mentioned, this is going to be another time for me to talk about how we have all these data, But for a long time now, they've been kind of sitting in a folder on someone's computer, on my computer, on your computer, and they haven't been incorporated into a database that is easily shareable. And that is because, for I think between 2011 and 2018, there was a really good effort to create a regional database to hold this data, and it ended up not. It just became stagnant and didn't follow through. And so since I think it was about 2018, Matthew Swartz, my predecessor, and I have been thinking really hard about how to move forward with a database option that is actually something that we could do ourselves. And in 2020, I actually just gave a talk about this. So if you need more information about Tableau and data management and this plan, I can share a presentation I gave 2 months ago, or I can talk to you about it. But right now, we're still in the midst of bringing all of that historic data, essentially back beyond 2008, into this database place where we can easily share it out. And we're really close. And we're doing, we've been really working very hard to get that done for folks. And we've shared a lot of the data with project sponsors now and with PNNL. So we're still working on that. Things that are still to come is essentially continue to pull in all the level 2 data in a shareable space. The level 3 data is in the shareable space, and then all of the ecosystem monitoring program data, which is a huge program where we collect lots of really intense data, bringing that data into the space as well as the next step. And so thinking about sharing data and looking and evaluating projects based on different research questions, I think it's important to talk about like where we are in the process. So today we're going to talk about Woluski. I've shared that public dashboard with you now. This is essentially looking at level 2 and 3 data through year 3. This is also a really good opportunity for me to talk about the drone model work that we've been working on. I've been talking about this drone modeling since 2020, and I'm really excited to roll out those results now and talk about how this modeling approach can be used on other sites to answer questions. So still in process, I'm going to talk about all of the sites that we surveyed in 2020 and 2021. Those dashboards are just really imminently going to be published. Hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have a draft of those dashboards to everyone. I've looked at all the data and we're just doing some final tweaks. If you do click through that Woluski dashboard, you can see there's a lot that goes into sort of finessing the even just the formatting to have it show online. So it's a lot of steps and we're really close. I'm going to talk about those results. We're also, like I mentioned, transitioning that EMP data. And then I want to mention that we will be rolling out the reports in addition to these Tableau dashboards and the updating the monitoring protocols. So I know that some folks, I've talked to folks all the time about monitoring protocols, and I want to say that, we have published updates to the monitoring protocols almost annually, and we have those available on our website. We publish them in the AIMER report. We put them in the EMP report, all of these different protocols used to collect the data that we're talking about. This document, specifically this protocol update that we keep talking about every year, is a much more like cohesive document where it takes all of those different updates and it combines them. And it's just taking us a little bit of time to get it finalized. Ian was just working on it yesterday. We're gonna definitely have it out this year. So, but if you want some protocols, just email us and we'll send you everything that we have, or you could just Google, it'll probably come up for you. All right, so now we get to talk about the ERTG revisits before I jump into the data. And I want to talk about this briefly right now because I want to just put everybody in the same headspace as me as we talk through the results and think about how we can probably, approach this maybe differently, or maybe think about how these revisits can be really informed by the data that we are collecting. When I think about revisiting a site or doing an action effectiveness monitoring report out on a site, I'm thinking about the adaptive management feedback loop. So project gets funded, and you have project construction, you have pre and post monitoring that happens, and then inevitably you're gonna want to reevaluate that project and look at the data, talk to the project manager, and get a feel for what was successful, what could have gone better, how that project is doing over time. And so I do think that it's important that we coincide these site revisits with action effectiveness monitoring report outs. And some of you got an email where I created a Tableau dashboard suggesting a different rollout of the revisits based on when action effectiveness monitoring data would be available to inform those. And essentially it takes the 2022 site revisit plan and it pushes it out between 22, 23, and 24. And then and some of them there's some other wiggle room in there. And that is really just based on when we expect there to be data that we can report out and have sort of a really good data-driven site revisit provided. And so what do I mean by data? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the data that we collect and the answers and the questions that we can answer today. And the main point I want to get to is how can we do a better job connecting the dots between what are the questions about project success and what is the data that we're collecting? And do we need to adaptively manage that data collection to be more appropriate to fit the questions a project has or people have of a project? And so going to a site and looking at it is extremely informative. And getting photos of the site, here is Steamboat Slough. You can see it's a really robust site. That's Narayan doing some survey work in the channel. This is really just a pretty picture as a placeholder between that slide and this one, which is very busy. But essentially a picture can be worth 1,000 words, but I really think that data is also really critical to inform what you're seeing in a picture. So for the ERTG suggested post-construction AIMER grading criteria, there are a lot of metrics in here. However, I don't know that we're monitoring the right data to inform all of the metrics that we're trying to evaluate. And so I think that one thing that we could think about as we go into evaluating projects is, providing a more quantitative guidelines on metrics being evaluated. So if you've ever created a trigger table for a project in terms of like when would a project be triggered for adaptive management, I think that the Estuary program would really benefit from more like quantitative guidelines to provide and to inform when adaptive management needs to occur. And I'd be happy to help produce that data. And I think all of us should be contributing to what we expect a project to do and when we think a project needs adaptive management, both by looking at pictures and also looking at the data. All right, so now I'm going to jump into the data for the 2020 and 2021 AIMER report outs. And I will remind everyone with all the sites that we saw and where they're located in the Columbia. So in 2020, we went back to Woluski for year 3 monitoring, and that is the full dashboard that I've shared. And we also went to Flights In for year 3 post-restoration. We went to the Center for year 5, and we did Staggerwald and Pre. In 2021, we went back to Wallacut for year 5. We went to Ruby Lake for year 8. And we did Polinsky and Pre, and Staggerwald was in construction. And in 2022, we will be going back. Sorry, did that something change? Oh, interesting. 21. Okay, yes. So in 2022, sorry, I'm losing track of time here. It's just what happens to me. We're going to be this summer, we're going to Woluski first thing. It's like the week of July 11th. We're going to be out there for a bunch of days doing our year 5 assessment, and we're going to be updating all the dashboard data as we come back from the field and process that. We'll be updating that with year 5. We're really excited to see how that comes out. We're going to be going to Dibley for year 10. Now, Dibley is one of the first sites that we've revisited as a 10-year site, so we're really excited to see how that's looking out there. And then, of course, Polinsky is going to be in year 1, and Staggerwald is still technically in construction. In 2023, we will this 2023 timeline for level 2 monitoring is still a little bit in flux. Looks like we're going to be going back to Svensson Island for the first time, either in Pre or year 1. Depending on that construction timeline, we're going to be going to West Sand Island, which I think is going to be year 2. We're going to do a full drone vegetation analysis at West Sand Island to sort of be able to track the management of those non-native species out there. And then for Ruby Lake, we're going to be going back for year 10, and then Staggerwald will be in year 1 post-restoration. So that is sort of the plan, what we've done and where we're going. I think that for me, everybody knows I love plants. So, I'm thinking about what is the progress of native plant community restoration. And why I like to ask this question to projects is because there's a lot of really important components that define plant community success. And they're all very critical to like how a project is doing post-restoration. So how has flooding frequency and duration been restored? That's going to be very influential on plant community success. How is salinity being restored? If you're at the mouth of the river, you may be reintroducing salinity to a project. How are soil conditions recovering over time? This is the template for which plant communities grow. Speaking of a template, what was the existing plant community? So reed-canary grass can be very stubborn to change depending on where it's at in these wetlands post-restoration. And that speaks to the seed bank. So if you have a really stable reed-canary grass plant community, you're going to have a very stable reed-canary grass seed bank. And then, of course, ongoing management is going to influence restoration success. So thinking about mowing and cattle grazing and things like that. So that's why I like to really talk about plant community success, because it has a lot of different, a myriad of different fundamental components that define it. All right, so I'm going to start jumping into the data, and I'm going to mainly focus on the drone analysis for Woluski, but you can click through and look at all of the data in the dashboard. And so Astoria, this project is located in Astoria. It's managed by the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. And I've actually been talking with Rudy about the Cowlitz project since about 2011. So that was like the first year of my dissertation. And at some point, I thought I was going to actually just do my entire dissertation on this Woluski project. But as we know, things are slow when you have to breach dikes. And so even though we started talking about it in 2011, I ended up using it as a control site in my study for pre-restoration conditions. It didn't end up getting breached or restored until 2017, right after I graduated. So it took that entire time for them to be able to push that project through, and I'm so excited they finally did. For the drone imagery analysis, I'm not going to give a methods presentation today, but I am signed up to give a methods presentation on how we created these models this fall, and I'm happy to share that information with folks if they want it, either talk to you one-on-one or send you the presentation once I do it. We have a multispectral drone with RGB and near infrared sensor. We essentially map the project. We process it in Pix4D, which is Sneha is our master Pix4D processor. She processes all that data. She gives me the rasters. We have the digital elevation model, the digital surface model, the terrain model. We have all these different rasters that we layer up in ArcGIS, and then using essentially training polygons, classify the image and come up with a plant community map for the whole site. And so we were able to come up with more than 50 different plant communities were independently classified with our training polygons, really, really high accuracy, really high resolution. It was greater than a 1/4 meter resolution, which I later identified as maybe too high of resolution because it was killing all of our computers. But we learned a lot by doing this project, and by working through these model creations. We created the site-wide plant community model, and then we also created a model using the digital elevation data where we mapped habitat access and opportunity across the site, and then we combined the two to create a habitat condition model. And I'm going to talk through all of those. When I talk about creating training polygons, I might lose some folks. And essentially what that means is that using the veg data that we collect on the ground, vegetation data we collect on the ground, I take those data and then I essentially train the model to classify the essentially pixels from the drone image based on those data. So here you can see I have, this is an aerial image, an oblique drone image from that drone flight in 2020. And I've just written the plant communities on this. So you can really see how they actually do stand out quite clearly in the drone imagery. And that makes sense that it would do so well in terms of the model creation. We've got the spike rush mix, the bulrush, carex mix. This is a fringe wetland that existed before the site was restored. Cattail and bulrush in here in the low marsh. We have a recanary grass, a few stubborn patches of recanary grass in the high marsh zones, and then just a lot of cattails. So the site is looking really good. And if we look at the other side of the site, so looking out towards Youngs Bay, we have the Woluski River here. Hopefully you can see my mouse. And again, we have this pre-existing fringe wetland. We have a patch of Phragmites that pops really well in the imagery. I will say that I have been tracking the size of that Phragmites patch and others since probably 2012, 2014, and it has not really changed. So I think that's good news for the project, where I don't necessarily think that we're going to see a lot of Phragmites sort of blossoming into the site, because we haven't seen it so far. But I can't make promises. It does seem to be very contained, though. And we're going to continue to track it, and it's going to be much easier to track things like Phragmites patches with the drone imagery than it is to do the survey work on the ground. Clearly, we pair those data. All right, so now let's look at the results. If you've been clicking around in the dashboard while I've been talking, fair enough, and maybe you've already seen this and you've seen that it's an interactive dashboard. You can see that we have kind of grouped the plant classifications into like native low marsh, mainly like dominance by cattails, dominance by bulrush, spike rush, low mudflat aquatics, and then of course channel networks. Also, we have the sedge, which is Carrots-Lingbii mix, and then some reed canary grass. If you are in there and you mouse over the plant communities or mouse over these bar charts, you can see that it will pop for you and you can really see where those are on the landscape. And 3 years post-restoration, 69% of the site is native plant community dominated, which I think is just fantastic. It's a really fast recovery. And I am looking forward to seeing what year 5 looks like. You know, at this point, looking at the site-wide analysis of data, we really have a very small amount of non-natives on the site, less than about 5% or less for the wetland plant community. And so this is a really powerful tool just in itself, just looking at plant communities across the site. And then when you pair it with the hydrology data, so here's the hydrograph. Again, this is data you can interact with in the dashboard. You can see tidal reconnection was in July of 2017. These blue lines are reference loggers, either on the outside of the site or in Young's Bay. And then all of these red orange lines were inside the site. And so you can see that the dramatic shift once tidal reconnection occurred. And then if we map that data, oh, sorry, I'm not quite ready to map it yet. What I wanted to say is I wanted to say how we take that data and we can look at it as salmon habitat opportunity. I've talked about salmon habitat opportunity almost continuously since 2018. Essentially what I mean by this is, you know, when there is greater than a half a meter of water, and the temperature conditions in the water are considered either optimal, so less than 17.5 degrees, marginal, greater than 17.5 degrees, or inhospitable, which is greater than 22 degrees. Again, this is for juvenile salmonids. We can sort of map out over time at the location of the data loggers what the salmon habitat opportunity looks like. For Woluski, because we see our data loggers across the site tracking really closely, we have modeled how this looks across the entire site using the drone imagery. And so we don't just know what the salmon habitat opportunity is at one place and one time, but we can talk about what it looks like across the entire site. And then that allows us to talk about acres of habitat. And for an example here, and if you click on the dynamic model, it might take your computer a little bit time to load, especially because we're all in a Teams meeting. I will say that Teams and Tableau both take a lot of internet. So I will warn you, if you click on it, it might be slow. But essentially, we have here a screenshot of April of 2021. You can see that for that month, we have about 135 acres of access for salmonids. And also in that month, you can see this pie chart here says 100%. That means that temperature conditions remain below 17.5 degrees for that entire time period. So of the accessible habitat, it was in optimal condition. So this is a really powerful tool. We can also think about this in terms of applying things like sea level rise or climate change scenarios utilizing a model like this. Now, the icing on the cake for me was combining the habitat access model with the plant community model. And then we can talk about how much of the site is accessible and native habitat. And I just think this is a really awesome tool. And so you can see this map is going to show you anything that's grayed out means there was less than a half a meter of water. That doesn't mean that those areas weren't engaged by tides. It just means that there wasn't enough water deemed appropriate for juvenile salmonids. They're probably still being engaged in that tidal flux and those food web dynamics. But I do think it's a powerful visual, and it looks like in April of 2021, there was about 124 acres of native habitats, mudflats, and channels accessible to salmonids during a high tide. So that is the model for Woluski. Really quick preview of those models, and you can go in and interact and read about those models more. There's a lot more we can do with that, and we would really like to do it with as many sites as we can. It is a really time-consuming process, but we continue to refine our approach to essentially streamline that and make it more accessible to apply for all projects. So things I didn't talk about today for Woluski that you can look at yourself are One other thing that we are working on out there is a mound study, so a constructed high and low marsh study where, when they're moving materials around on the site, some of the areas were mounded, to create topographic complexity and essentially manage the materials that were out there. And so we've done a high and low marsh comparison across the site, looking at soil conditions, sediment accretion and erosion dynamics, and plant community development. And this is sort of a standalone study. And you can see those results up through year 3 in the dashboard. They're really interesting. It tracks with some hypotheses I have about how high and low marsh plant communities develop at different paces. Also, do you want to know if the Woluski project is keeping up with sea level rise? Well, we've also have that data in there. So I recommend that you go in and you check out the dashboard, and you can also take a look at the macroinvertebrate data collected, and soon we'll have fish data in there. NOAA just went out in May and April and did fishing at Woluski for year 5, and they found a lot of salmon. So the project overall is doing great, and we will finalize this publication for the year 5 data once we go out and collect all of it and have it. So probably that wrap up will come next spring. All right, so I have mentioned a lot of data. You can click through this dashboard. Essentially, most of these components are going to be available for the other dashboards. However, we have not done the drone modeling for every site, although we are aspiring to do that as much as we can. And it might be one of those things where we might want to talk to the group or to project sponsors and see if that's something that they think their site could benefit from. And then we'd be happy to help them with that. Now I'm going to try to breeze through the other projects that we have done level 2 monitoring on in the last 2 years. I'm going to breeze through these because we really want to focus folks on those dashboards once they come out. I'm happy to give a more data-driven talk of these projects in the fall, or have one-on-one conversations with project sponsors about these results as we move forward. But again, those results are going to be ready essentially this week if you guys want to look at them. So Flight's End is the next project. Flight's End was in year 3 in 2020. This was a 42-acre floodplain restoration project with one of the primary goals to create natural wet prairie conditions. This construction happened in 2017, and we did pre-monitoring just a couple weeks before construction. Here's some drone flights of Flight's In year 1 and Flight's in year 3. What I want to point to is there was some marsh plain lowering here. You can see that in year 1, it's really nicely holding some water. You can still see a lot of bare ground where plant communities are still starting to develop. And then as you go over to year 3, we see the Wapato and native wetland plants really popping in some of these ponded areas. Some of them are still in development and kind of holding a lot of water. And then the one thing that's a little bit of a surprise, if you look at the drone imagery, is that it doesn't look like those bare ground areas are accumulating biomass or plant community development. And I think that the main reason this is, and it's a surprise to everybody, is that they're mowing the project. So essentially they mow as far down as they can into the wetland. And so those areas where we do see really beautiful green native veg, that's where they just weren't able to mow. And so this is what that looks like on the ground as an aerial, kind of looking down at the site. This is a nice big native wetland, and then mowed all the way around. And then looking at another angle, you can see some of the scrape downs here and that connectivity with the essentially, I'm not sure what channel that is. It might be, if people want to know, Tom might probably tell us. But here, is it the high flow channel or the main channel connection?
It's the main flow connection coming right off of Crane's Loop, right into the wetlands. Nice.
And you can see that it's definitely connected well. So here is, this is kind of, I've taken a close-up of a quadrat, and you can kind of see that it's really just a lot of bare ground. And then this is hairy cat's ear, which is like a dandelion. So when it's mowed so severely, we have a hard time capturing plant community development, but we're going to try to get out there this year before mowing happens and get a better feel for the vegetation and how it's doing. We also plan on doing another drone flight before mowing. So that is going to give us a much better understanding of how the project is doing for year 5. And, you know, it's really a lesson learned in terms of misunderstandings about project management post-construction. So also, you know, you can look to the data. I have all of that data available, and we'll be publishing it very soon for folks to look at, essentially like percent cover and things like that. All right, now going into Wallacut year 5. We did report out on this site in year 3 in 2020 and 2019, and we revisited it in 2021. It was a tidal reconnection to the Wallacut Slough. And let's look at these aerial images that I have here. So in 2019, you can see that there was actually this kind of gray color is a lot of bare ground and standing dead. You can see it sort of throughout the project. This is, again, year 3. And then as we move into 2021, and maybe it's just my trained eye, but we see a dramatic increase in plant cover and a dramatic decrease in standing dead and bare ground. So we had actually modeled that would happen, and we were really excited to see that it did. And we do plan on following this up with a drone imagery classification, because we did do that in 2019. So these results are really promising. The site looks like it's doing really well. Here's some more oblique images of the site. I've kind of driven a box around that area that you saw in the drone image. And again, you know, in 2019, this was pretty much all bare ground. So it's really doing well. It's really coming back. This one like berm road area. And then internally, it's also growing some native veg. So what about the fish data? So we did do some fish sampling in April of 2021, and we had, and by we, I mean NOAA had a really hard time sampling this. It was just bad timing. In that period of time where we chose to sample in April, there was very, very low water. It was like abnormally low water for that time of year for this site, and able to get a good fishing in the main channel. And this is one of the problems with our approach to fishing for these AIMER projects. When we just do a spot check, we don't have enough time to really capture those dynamics. So we didn't find very many salmon out there, but I think that they definitely are out there. It was just a timing thing with the fish sampling. Okay, moving right on to Le Centre year 5. Le Centre was another connection with the East Fork. We reintroduced natural dynamics with the East Fork Lewis, and there were 2 major areas of restoration. One, there's two separate wetlands really, but both connecting to the East Fork. We had Le Centre West and Le Centre East, and I'm going to show some images of these. So here is Le Centre West, and one thing that is just absolutely amazing and shocking when you are out on the project is the increase of riparian shrub scrub plant community. You can see it pretty clearly here in this area. If you see my mouse here, you can see the channel connection. This is called what we call Catfish Pond. And this is where the plantings were really densely placed. Oh my goodness. We could even walk. This was so thick and the plantings were so tall, we could barely walk through them. It was shocking and wonderful. So this project is doing really, really well with that shrub scrub, riparian plant community development. You can see the Wapato Pond is still full of Wapato. It's doing really well. Clearly some haying going on in these high marsh zones as well. However, those were not in our AIMER monitoring area. All right, so looking at the lower marsh, so Le Centre East, this is what we call Catfish Pond affectionately. I know, I feel like every project has 5 names and I'm like responsible for memorizing all of them. And sometimes I'm not good at it. Just ask Ian today when I was getting mixed up earlier. So this site is really interesting, this lower wetland along the East Fork, because they removed the water control structure and then a bunch of beaver dams went in. And so it is still holding water at a higher elevation, but there is connectivity even with the beaver dams in the slough. We see really, really beautiful Wapato plant community development in this site at year 5. Here's another view of that site. You can see how that Wapato plant community really branches out across the entire area, really much farther down than it was when the site was holding water at a much higher elevation with a water control structure. And then this is actually the other wetland, and this is that giant riparian forest that was planted. So it's looking really good. All right, what about salmon at Le Centre? Well, salmon, we actually caught a lot of salmon at La Center. It was 20% of the community sampled was Chinook salmon. So definitely salmon are getting into the site and utilizing the site. And I think that's a really meaningful result for La Center. And like I said, just because we didn't see salmon at Walcott doesn't mean they aren't there. I think that was just a timing of sampling issue. All right, moving right along to Ruby Lake, year 8. Ruby Lake this is an oblique image of Ruby Lake. You can see the ponds that were scraped down and they're full of Wapato. This project was reconnected in, let's see, what year did it say? 2013. And we've done, we have a really nice little trajectory of monitoring. So when you look at the data, you can kind of see how things have shifted over time. Definitely a giant increase in natives. It even jumped, and I'm not gonna, unless people really want to see this data, I'm not gonna pull it up. But it jumped like 20% more native abundance between year 5 and year 8, which I thought was really interesting. Okay, so, I think those slides were out of order. Let me go to the aerial images. Here is year 5, and you can see why we would see that jump in natives in these ponds. It just took a little while for the native Wapato to really gain hold. So you can see here that there's a lot more green, robust native plant community growth now in year 8 compared to year 5. And that is really where we see that jump. Our transects go right through those ponds. So our transects are actually not capturing these other areas that are looking a little bit brown and not as full of native plant communities. And one of the things that I will say about this, and I actually tried to find a photo, is that in year 8, when we were out there in 2021, there were a lot of cattle. I think there was a hole in the fence, something happened, and a lot of cattle came through. So while we did see really robust plant community growth in these marsh zones where essentially the cattle don't want to go because it's too muddy, along the edge of the wetland, it was heavily grazed. So that's something to just consider as we move forward, because I don't think that was the first year we had seen cattle out there, or I had seen it. Here's another image of the site. You can see those really full Wapato ponds, and then kind of like this little bit yellowy green color is more like grazed canary grass. Really, really well. The product's doing really well. I would say overall, I think some image classification would be really useful for this project, and we hope to do it soon. All right, so next steps. That was really fast. There's a lot of data I didn't talk about. But I think that if people have questions or want to see the data, we're going to be pushing those dashboards, at least a draft of them out this week. We really want to work with project sponsors on these report outs, and also for the upcoming ERTG site revisits, incorporating the analysis into the revisit is going to be really critical, I think. And we really want to start incorporating the drone, the UAV image analysis and soil conditions monitoring across all sites, especially the level 2 sites. But when maybe one of the flexibilities we could have with the AIMER program is if a project has a lot of questions where a drone image classification or modeling approach would answer a lot of questions, we could incorporate that into our level 2 monitoring, or even help project sponsors do that work themselves. And so I just want to say that I'm excited to be able to talk about all these projects today. And I do think that as we move forward, we might really think about how we approach landowner agreements and long-term management of projects to reduce grazing and try to have a more goal-oriented project management situation, especially like with the mowing. Maybe we need to adapt the project's goals and objectives post-restoration if things like this come up. Okay, so I will say thank you very much. I meant to get a picture of Ian up here, but I guess that didn't get updated. So for next time, Ian with his cat. But for now, you've got Scarlett and my dog and Sneha and her kitty cat. So many thanks for everyone for listening to this portion of the talk. I'm gonna just tee off the next portion, and then we can talk about my talk and we can talk about the next component. So I think that we need to start thinking about endpoints and monitoring success. I keep talking about that, but I think having these guidelines in place would really help us as restoration ecologists and monitoring ecologists. And also think about how we might need to adapt our approach to monitoring to better fit project goals and objectives and evaluation of those. I did send out this ERTG revisit schedule, and I will post, going to post that recommendation. And this is just a recommendation based on when I think report outs will happen. So, this is just my take on what we could do. I think that we're probably going to meet somewhere in the middle, but I do think informed revisits with data are going to be a really good approach for doing that adaptive feedback loop. Okay, I'm trying to share this in the chat and I'm not being successful. Ian or Sneha, do you think you could share this in the chat? Because I'm having a hard time finding my chat share while I'm also presenting. Ian's probably frantically working on the dashboards, isn't paying attention. That's fair. All right, so sorry, I just wanted to share that link.
Sarah, can I jump in here? This is Tom with Crest, and I just want to reiterate, I said this last year, and I really think it's important, is just kind of helping when these sites do go through the AEMR monitoring, really checking in with the project sponsors about what the maintenance looks like at the site and really helping select where data should be collected. So specifically for Flights In, we worked with the landowner ODFW, and they have these pre-existing agreements where they mow it, and they really mow it for other species. They're mowing it for waterfowl in the fall and winter. They mow it during the summer, but it's to set that up. So that's something that's part of their management at the wildlife area. And in order for Crest to do a fish restoration project where they allowed us to go in, pull out these culverts, put in the bridges and the channels, that was part of the agreement, was they were going to continue to manage the site for waterfowl. And so obviously that impacts when we're looking to do how well is wet prairie going to respond to some of these treatments. That's going to be part of the equation. But I just like to, again, we talked about this a little bit last year, and just reiterate that project sponsors should really be involved in that selection of what are the AIMR metrics being collected, and are those going to be conflicted with what the landowner, in this case, a lot of cases, the public agency is going to do. They're going to continue to manage it a certain way going in the future, just to reduce those kind of conflicts. That's all I'd like to point out.
Yeah, I think more communication is really good. I agree. So I think that it would be great. Maybe somebody has been able to share this link into the chat. Sorry. Oh, okay. And I just wanted to, speaking of that, Tom, I think that's a really good comment for looking at the post-construction assessment criteria, because there's a lot of metrics in here. And so kind of fitting the metric to the project and to what the expectations are coming out of construction. I think that those need to be set up really clearly. I mean, if you look at the ERTG template for Flights In, that was Matt that set that monitoring up, but we were really tasked with monitoring for the wet prairie conditions, and we did try to I guess we just didn't realize that the mowing was as extensive as it was. And so again, that's kind of a communication breakdown. And I think that we could all be a little bit better at communicating about things like that, but also just making sure those expectations are managed in official documents as well, in terms of how everyone is getting informed about what the project's goals and objectives are. I think that, across the board, we could do better. And that is exactly why we're going to chat about all this today. So I am now going to stop talking, and I think we should have a group discussion about all of this. And I really appreciate everyone listening, and I really appreciate Tom Josephson. I know that he has we have talked a lot about being better communicators about these kind of these things, and I really appreciate him. Anybody? Okay, the floor is open to discuss things. Tom, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm just gonna jump in a little bit, you guys. I feel like we collect data that was established by the report back in 2013. So we collect pre and post data that are metrics that we collect across all these different sites. There are not quantifiable design criteria that we can use in comparison to these sites, right? I mean, right now, the ERTG uses a 2-year footprint, a 2-year flood footprint as to determine the size of the project, right? They don't have any quantitative goals of how frequently, the duration, the magnitude, yada, 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 and the temperature goals, all that kind of stuff as to like, what is a project successful? And so we're kind of like Sarah and Matt took a stab at this back at CREC in 2018 and came up with those habitat opportunity metrics as a model, as a first stab at trying to assess when opportunity increases at these sites and are they being successful, or for at least increasing opportunity. But I mean, that's the thing, is like, and I think that's something that Sarah has been struggling with along with Matt and other folks. It's like, how do we know when a project is successful? And now we have the ERTG revisit templates trying to grade a site, if you will. So, and I think it really is incumbent on either the project sponsor or somebody who is very familiar with what the design and what their goals are for that site to develop some kind of quantitative or trigger table or something that we can use to say objectively whether a site is being successful or not. Does that make sense? And so that's, I think, the struggle that we're having. And so, like, when we put together these Tableau dashboards, it's a first stab at saying, hey, this is what we think could be reasonable performance criteria, but we really need some input from the project sponsors. Any feedback would be good. Hey, Lynn, I think your hand is raised.
It is. Yeah, and that I think matches what I was thinking early in Sarah's presentation, the part about Waluski-Youngs, and where you showed how much was accessible at a high tide. I thought, I wonder if the high tide is the quote unquote right stage at which to be judging that this particular project has so much access. So yeah, that's an example of where, it was that the project sponsor's intent, the tribe's intent that it be that much accessible at a high tide, or medium, low, whatever you want to pull out of your, tide stage hat. You're right that, and I think I also like what you said, Catherine, that it's probably going to be the project sponsor that should come up with that, or at least propose it, because what your constraints were and what you thought was the right metric.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like we're using the opportunity metrics as a first stab, but I do feel like it's a work in progress, and the idea of trying to develop these performance criteria, well, it would be a good first step, I guess, basically.
And before someone else jumps in, I think it would be good to have potential metrics like that for flux of material off the site as well.
Yeah, definitely. Any other comments? Any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions? That was a lot of information. Did everybody follow?
I didn't show as many graphs. I normally show many graphs. I don't think I even showed one graph, did I? Well, a couple bar charts. I don't know if those count. I will say that there's a lot to talk about. So we have all of the site revisits that I talked about. I mean, the AMER report outs that I sort of gave like a really brief hot take on those. We have the model that was produced, and then we also have these ERTG site revisits. And so I think that it might just be kind of an overwhelming number of topics. So if you're overwhelmed, think how I feel, because I'm working on all of this at once. But also, oh, I think I see a hand raised, so I'll stop filling the space with my voice. But I really would like to hear what people think about the revisit schedule as well, so we can provide that feedback to ERTG. I don't see whose hand is raised, but I do see somebody's hand is raised.
I think it's Jason.
Yeah, hey, this is Jason Carnezis. Thinking about how Dibley is one of the older sites and it's only 10 years old, and we're using words like success and performance. And I think I'm more in the performance frame of mind right now to just get a baseline of how these projects are performing in their first 10 years. And not being so concerned about what defines success, and figuring out what we can and can't get from our current AEMR monitoring. That's what I heard at the beginning of Sarah's talk, and that's what I'm mostly interested in. I think that's in line with the spirit of what a revisit is how are the projects performing. And to address the question about grading, it's not that you're receiving a grade, it's more like the ERTG is grading themselves on their assumptions. They really want to put their own assumptions to the test. Were we right, were we wrong, and why? And what kind of monitoring information helps support that, along with, just conversations as we walk around on site, which I think is also important given that we've all most of us have been stuck in home offices and maybe a real office for quite some time. So I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm less concerned about what makes success. I think in my mind, success is a whole conversation unto itself, many conversations. So I had one other point, and this is kind of how my brain has been working since 2019. It comes and goes, so I apologize. So I'm gonna pause there, and if it comes back, I'll raise my hand again. Thanks.
So I'm looking at the slide that Sarah put back up, and those are all seemingly very subjective. Is that the ERTG filling this out for each site, or is this the project sponsor for the revisits? Does anybody, Sarah, are you or Jason, are you familiar with this?
I'm pretty sure this is ERTG doing this work.
Okay.
I will say that I did, in terms of, oops, sorry, I'm trying to forward my slides, but I'm time. I did come up with some essentially what I think we can say with the data that we are collecting and kind of trying to connect those dots. And so for level 3, I think we could do these habitat opportunity and access models to evaluate conditions on the site. If it was coupled with a digital terrain model, it can be very powerful like the Woluski, but also informative if it's not. We can still look at how elevations have shifted across the site and think about how it's changed conditions. I do think the understanding, just like I think it was Len Krasno that mentioned, like, well, is it high tide or is it low tide, or how much of the year or how many hours does a site need to provide access in optimal conditions? And I 100%, I feel what Jason is saying in terms of, like, having hard and firm guidelines, it can also really be limiting. And so we really just are still trying to understand what these sites are producing and trying to get a feel for, is that enough or is there more? And so it's not so much that we necessarily need to create those hard and firm, but it would be helpful to be thinking about this more critically. And then maybe even assessing sites in a way that allow us to create those sideboards as we move forward in evaluating restoration. And then the other thing about the level 3 data is that sediment accretion and erosion data. And I think one thing we can very easily track is how the project is doing in terms of, is it keeping pace with sea level rise? And that's not necessarily a question that I see in the ERTG criteria, but I do think it could be a self-maintaining question. And that's something, those are two things that I think those are really big questions that we can actually try to answer with the level 3 data. And then for the level to data, even looking more exclusively at like plant community development, as I displayed with Woluski. I do think that it would be good to have those sidebars in terms of like, well, how much native plant community are we expecting to be developed on this site? I think creating these expectations pre-restoration is where it's at. And we actually did that with Staggerwell. We did modeling. We created predictions that we will be evaluating too, in terms of what we think the habitat conditions would become post-restoration. And so having that sort of information before a restoration occurs is going to help us evaluate project success. And then, of course, looking at macroinvertebrate communities, that's a really straightforward, looking at reference conditions and site conditions, looking at are they producing similar macroinvertebrate communities that support juvenile salmonids? And then, of course, are fish there? Fish monitoring is always really helpful in answering questions about project success. So I will stop talking now, but that felt like a really good time to talk about what I think we can say with the data that we have and why I think that it would be really beneficial to pair some site revisits with data report outs with AIMER. So I will stop sharing this now.
I'll raise my hand again. I remember it was right around the site visits, and I thought it was a really good way of thinking about the site visits in terms of the monitoring data that is available and will be available, and that's exactly the kind of feedback ERTG wants and Gary is looking for to facilitate a really useful site revisit. So I think this is just for the fraction of folks on the call who were at the ERTG meeting a couple weeks ago when we rolled out the idea of site revisits and a little bit more robust template. My takeaway was it may have felt overwhelming because we just listed all the sites. And part of that was because we haven't been out in the field for a long time, the majority of us who aren't actually doing the monitoring. And I really want to reinforce that we don't want to overextend and make this more of a lift on top of everything else going on. And in that same spirit, we want quality over quantity. So I really encourage folks who are on the docket for potential site revisits to review that table that Sarah has sent out to the group. And really think about it, because I think we're coming back to ERTG in July. Is that right? Or are you guys getting comments to them by the end of June? I can't remember what the time frame was.
I'll check in June, I think.
Yeah,
okay,
Gary wants comments by the end of June.
Okay, yeah. So it'd be good, this week basically for anyone who's got comments to submit them to Gary directly or through Sarah. If you guys want to come through as a united front on what this table should be. I think, the reasoning is sound and legitimate. Thanks.
And for anybody that's not familiar with this process, we keep talking about the ERTG and the site revisits. It's basically going back several years after construction and seeing how a project is doing, is performing, as Jason says. And the project sponsors have to fill out a little template. And that template could have some data in it, basically, as a way of like defending how a project is doing or showcasing how a project is performing, I guess, basically. So that's all supposed to be provided to the ERTG before the site visit. So the question is, there's all these projects and which ones to go see this coming summer versus maybe waiting till later. I think I'm trying to encapsulate the conversation briefly for folks that are not necessarily familiar with it. Hopefully I did okay. Hey, Tom, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think, Sarah and I chatted about this quite a bit last week, as well as I've chatted with my coworkers about it. And it really seems like, to me, the AEMR data can provide pretty useful insight into certain specific projects, but it's not, and I'm just speaking in terms of CREST project, it's not going to answer the most interesting features for all of our projects. And so where the AEMR is useful, I think we pull it in, I think we reference it, and it definitely helps tell the story. But what I'm planning for the CREST projects is really kind of honing in on both the AEMR where appropriate, but other metrics. And specifically, I'm thinking like, channel cross sections, channel down cuttings, channel accretion. These are all things that when we went through these revisits a number of years ago, whoever was as part of that, the big questions for the ERTG at that time were what fish data do you have and how are the channels responding? Are new channels developing? Are channels filling in? Are all those questions? And so unfortunately, we don't have fish data for a lot of projects. I mean, we really only have it for a handful of sites, so that hasn't changed. But I do think we have more channel cross-section data where on a number of these. And so really that's what I'm planning on focusing on, because I think that's going to be the most interesting to the ERTG, aside from the fish access standpoint, which unfortunately we can't really answer. And so, you know, it's unfortunate that Gary's not on the call today, because I'd really like to tease out how much, as Sarah and Catherine both said, how much are we expected to present this coming summer versus this idea that Sarah's floated and I support, where maybe we do a revisit this summer focusing on certain attributes, but then we do a follow-up with this AIMER data as it's available, kind of this two-stage review, or other kind of you know, more flexible things. I don't know if anybody on the call who's on the steering committee can kind of answer whether we really should be focused on revisits only in summer 22 and summer 23, or if we have the flexibility to go out a little bit. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but when it's coming down to me is I'm looking at the project list, and Crest has like 11 projects or something crazy to look at this summer. I think we can present a lot of those, but I agree that some of them should get pushed a year or two. So with that, maybe if somebody on the steering committee has any insight into that, I think that would be helpful for all of us.
Yeah, this is Jason, not to hog the mic, but I think hopefully I'll be even more explicit. You should recommend what you can handle with the most robust data in a given year. That's the way I feel like Sarah is framing this up. If there is more data, so that's one answer. Yes, the answer is yes, you should be able to push it out if the reasoning could be for two reasons. One, we're overloaded. Two, it's just going to make more sense to wait because we'll have more information. Both are valid. To Sarah's point, and yeah, so my brain did it again, but basically, I want to make sure that, sorry, to Tom's point about if you have other questions and you feel like AEMR isn't going to hit the mark, or isn't going to answer it as best as possible, I feel like Sarah hit it on the head that at the beginning of the ERTG, scoring and when you're presenting, and maybe we need to make this part of the template, like, hey, you know, this is what we're really interested in. These are the things we're really interested in. And you can send it back to ERTG. This is what you asked us the last time we were out at site revisits historically. So this is why we want to measure this. I think that's all valid stuff. And the sooner we know, the better. So we can make the plans for the level of effort it's going to take for a given site. I think eventually what will happen is this will also help us. This will also be, we'll be able to be tying back those needs and those desires, Tom, and everybody else who does this, back to, you know, how does this help further the uncertainties ERTG has about scoring a project? I think that's where we tie it back concretely. There's always going to be plenty of stuff to monitor that's very interesting. And we want to make sure, you know, for the Bonneville funds, we tie it back to, you know, things that are helping answer ESA juvenile salmoniid questions, and how they interface with directly and indirectly with our restoration projects.
Sorry, go ahead.
Alex, can you hear me? This is Alex Huber.
Yeah.
Can
Go ahead,
you hear me?
Alex.
Yeah.
Lynn,
So, hey,
Lynn's got her hand up.
sorry I called in late, but I've grabbed the last 15 minutes of the conversation. I'm out in the field here, but I just wanted to sort of second what Tom was saying. At Bachelor, which is not on the list for revisits, it was done too recently, but we've really focused on the channel cross-section part. We're really interested in how the channels, excavated and dredged spoils are going to behave, through time, and are they going to maintain access for fish, and how are they going to, just respond to especially through a freshet like the one we're having. So also, we've been able to do a bunch of fish sampling out there this spring, started in February, and it's ongoing. So those are the two things that we're focusing on in Bachelor. And it's kind of like Tom was saying, it seems like it's sort of project specific, based on the characteristics of your project, that sort of inform what you look at and scrutinize. And I think, every project is different, and it's, we need baseline data for all of them, but there are certain projects that just sort of cry out for certain things to be looked at and monitored closely.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea, is like, it should be incumbent on the project sponsor to say, like, what are you designing for, and what is your success criteria, and not on like Sarah, I guess, basically. I haven't heard try to come up with that. So
well, I'll definitely have an opinion, but I like to share the space with others. I'm just going to jump in really quick. Sorry, Lynn. I just want to say that it would be really beneficial, as Jason said, to have this as part of that ERTG template process where that data is available to everyone, where we can see what are the uncertainties and what are the questions that are going into that project at the onset. That would be so incredibly useful, because I feel like there is this disconnect between the AMR monitoring and what those uncertainties are. And so we should try to connect those dots better. And so let's work together to do that. So that I'm going to get off that soapbox.
Or maybe somewhere in between, because I don't know that sometimes the project sponsor is going to throw out the uncertainties for the ERTG. Let the ERTG come up with their own uncertainties. But I mean, like, somewhere in between, like when the project is constructed and designed and constructed, those goals and objectives transfer over to like the monitoring plan. What are we sampling, and why, sort of thing, and what is some kind of range of success or definitions of success or something like that, or performance criteria. Hey, Lynn, I'm sorry, we're all talking over you. And you've had your hand up so politely. Are you still there?
Yeah, that's okay. Just like everyone else, just trying to remember something for more than 2 seconds is the challenge. Anyway, yes, I agree with all the above. And the only thing I want to add is that, one way to think about, as Tom was saying, if you have a bunch of sites, what exactly at what point do you have the right monitoring data to make it worth it for ERTG to go out? One way to think about it is go back to your, whether it was called SBU or PBU report, and see what they listed as specific uncertainties when they scored your project. And then, do you now have the type of monitoring data that they would be able to, feel anything close to information / resolution on those uncertainties, or feel more comfortable about how they scored it or not. Maybe obvious, but I thought I'd throw it in just for fun.
So, anybody else? Any questions or comments? Because I would suggest some kind of combination of like what. So I think the Tableau dashboards are a template to help with the revisits, but there's probably some data that's not going to be available through the Tableau dashboards, right? So like the cross sections, at least at this point in time, some of the stuff that's not available yet. But that is,
I will say the cross section data. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, Catherine, because I was going to say cross section data is amazing in Tableau. We just haven't rolled that out yet, but we could, given a phased approach to the ERTG revisits, incorporate that and work with Crest and others. We actually have CLT cross sections in the Tableau already, but we haven't pushed those out. Anyway, they do show up well. They're really good and easy to share. And I know Crest is coming onto the Tableau. They've got their own membership, and so you guys could start integrating that yourselves if you wanted to. But it's really fun and much easier to use than Excel. Sorry. I'm done. Sorry, Catherine.
No. Tom, does that help at all?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think that Tableau is a really good resource, and we are going to continue to lean on it and push for that. And I guess, I mean, just kind of going back on what I said before, I think it's kind of on the sponsors to just kind of work out where we think the AEMR data's at. Like, I'll just give a couple quick examples. So Government Island and Dairy Creek, they're both level 3 AEMR. So they're collecting water surface elevation, sediment accretion, photo points, probably missing something, but pretty cursory level of information. So what we're doing is, because really both of those projects, we need to understand, are those channels filling up with sediment? Are they down cutting? Are they threatening to change the hydrology for the wetlands associated behind them? Those are the real questions of project success. Those are the threats to the site, et cetera. And so from my standpoint, waiting for 5 years of AEMR data is it's not gonna tell us anything. Presenting these other data sets, which we've been collecting for 3 to 4 years, depending on the project site, and presenting that is going to be a more informative metric. And so again, I think that it's kind of up to all of us as project sponsors to really say, you know, on the other side of that would be some of those North Unit projects where we have a lot of vegetation monitoring and we have a lot of sediment accretion data. Those would benefit from presenting that full AEMR data set. And so I think it's a matter of kind of picking and choosing, like, which ones should we, it's not really worth waiting another 2 years on Government Island. We can present what we know today and have these non-AEMR metrics that we want to present, which we think are more informative. And then other sites, which, yeah, maybe we should wait for year 8 or year 10 or things like that. And so I just had a quick question, Sarah. It looks like Lynn likes that, so that's good. In terms of the AE, and again, I'm in complete agreement. Everything needs to go to Tableau from my standpoint. Just the data sharing is going to be so much easier across the board. I love that we're moving that direction. Going back to the available AEMR data, is that are those on the LSEP website right now? Like, I know older reports have been like, what's the easiest way for project sponsors to pull up the most recent 2019, 2020, whatever it might be, 2021 AEMR data or annual reports?
So level 3 projects are not reported out on like in the traditional sense. So just the level 2 projects, those reports are online, or I can just email them to you, or April probably has them. In terms of that level 3 data, I mean, you guys just been working really closely with us, QAQCing it, evaluating, looking at it. You know, you have your version, we have it in the Tableau database. We can easily, especially since you guys are now getting the Tableau as well, as we could just push a dash to you and you could update it, you could analyze it. Those data are not like in a public space. They were only going to be in a public space if we push them into the public space, right? And we've been doing that on a project by project basis in terms of like how that data is hosted. As I mentioned earlier, it's like we're like out to like 10 million data points right now in terms of like every project. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you for that level.
But we can give it back to you in Tableau anytime you want, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
But you know what? I was just listening to you, Tom, about your sites, and it does seem like you do have trigger tables and the performance criteria already sort of at least kind of, if it's not in your head, it seems like it's written down somewhere, and that would be really, really useful to put in as like how a project is performing. And I think, as Sarah alluded to, like if we don't need to necessarily manage all of this, you know, for your sites, that kind of thing. So if you wanted to put this stuff in your Tableau for your different sites, that would be awesome, I think. Am I correct, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it would be really good to have more like transparency of what people are expecting out of their projects, and for us to put it in a shared space. And I mean, to be honest, like we're doing a great job. Like, I think that we're all doing a really good job. And this is like this new opportunity for us to do a better job communicating with each other and sharing data and reporting out on data. And I hope that it just helps us overall improve this process. So, I mean, I'm a big dreamer. So.
Kaylin, you
I
have
just
your
wanna-
hand up again.
Oh, Kaylin.
Yeah, it's like I'm gonna get repetitive motion syndrome. Yeah, I wanted to compliment you guys as well on the storytelling features on Tableau. That it's more than just a database that people can go in who aren't familiar with the program or with an individual project, and really understand where you started and what some of the constraints were and all that stuff. I like that a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, we're continuing to like work with it. So I think that one of the really cool things about that space is that, we can push something like that to Crest and then they can update it with as much information as they want or add their own data to it. And so I think that that kind of like living report is the wave of the future. I swear Tableau's not paying me. I swear. I wish they would.
But I mean, that is the one thing is that we are, Sarah, Ian, and Sneha put together these, here's some questions that are of interest to us, right? About these different projects. Here's what we can answer with the data that we have. Are there other questions that we're not putting in there that are of interest to the group? I mean, like, would it be useful to include, I don't know, whatever, as other questions? So that's a, I mean, right now we're kind of thinking of like the whole performance criteria as like, how is this site performing versus by like the water quality or, the water surface elevation and temperature data. That's one question we're trying to answer. The vegetation and how vegetation communities are doing. And that's another question we're trying to answer. Are sites keeping up or sediment accretion keeping up with sea level rise? Another question we're trying to answer. Are there other questions that are of interest to the group that we could host with these data sets, I guess, basically, or sites? Lynn, do you have your hand up again, or is that the repetitive?
I do. Now, as you guys are aware, ERTG for the last, year and a half has been slowly working its way through a new version of their updated uncertainties. So that'll be a whole potential, and it is getting with those of us on the steering committee who've seen a more recent version than probably most of the folks on the call think it's getting better and better and better. And there will be potentially a series of questions that we can think about the way that Catherine just described.
That'll be very useful. I will say that sometimes like questions that Catherine asks are like things that maybe might pop up later, and please feel free to reach out and be like, hey, Sarah, have you considered, slicing the data this way or that way? I will say in the 2020 AIMA report, Sneha and I poured our heart and soul into many different types of analyses in that report, and we got zero feedback. And so we've kind of dialed it back a little bit. We've just kind of stuck to like the very basic analysis, kind of those basic questions that I covered in this one. And so, it's not that we can't do more, it's that we just need to get more feedback from folks on what they want to see, how they want to see the data sliced, essentially. And likely it's something we can do. We can essentially program Tableau to do it and then do it for all the different projects if the data is there. And Ian is probably cringing that I'm saying things like that, but it's possible in theory. So I guess the answer is please reach back out to me and talk to me if you have ideas or thoughts or questions, especially the project sponsors who are maybe seeing this data for the first time.
Lynn says this is a strangely quiet. I feel like remote meetings are somewhat awkward. I don't know about y'all, but I feel people are a little bit awkward in these kind of meetings. Seriously, any other questions, comments, concerns, any input or guidance in the data that you've seen so far? I know we threw a lot at you, but if you have a chance to look at the Tableau dashboards, there's a link that Sarah put in the chat. There's a couple links, and then I sent the one for Waluski out to everybody on the distribution list. So go ahead and look at that. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and reach out to Sarah, Sneha, or Ian after the meeting. But What do y'all think? Any comments? Haida, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, I just had a question about whether you have a sort of a document with the aims, specific aims for Tableau, and sort of like the strengths and limitations, and what, something like an overarching plan.
I guess I don't quite understand that question.
Well, I guess from my point of view, every tool has a use, and I'm just wondering if you have sort of written down the specific uses that, and sort of gotten some consensus, I guess, from the sponsors about the specific uses, and then what you won't be using it for.
Yeah, interesting. We did cover some of that in the last talk. And so that is documented in that presentation. And we'll definitely be mentioning that in the AIMA report as it's published.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I will say if people missed that last Tableau presentation, it was specifically on essentially what Haida has just asked. That presentation is hosted on our website under the Science Workgroup meetings. So I think that's a really good place to start if you're totally unfamiliar with what we're talking about in terms of Tableau.
And what our goals and objectives are. All right, well, I'm fine. And and Narayan, go for it.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on Tableau. I've been finally, I haven't had time, but I'm finally poking around LSEP's dashboards, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited to the way the database works and how interactive and how visually stimulating it is. It's way better than Excel. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to be able to see other sponsors' data on their dashboards and being able to share our data with LSEP so that they can analyze it the way they analyze it, and we can analyze it for in-house monitoring and post-processing lessons learned type of things. So thanks, Sarah, for kind of being the spokesperson for Tableau. Yeah, and I'm excited about this field season. See you next month.
Yeah, I think that the LSEP monitoring team is really excited to get away from the computer for a minute.
Yeah, same here.
Heidi, your hand is still up. Is that, do you have another question or that repetitive? Sorry, I have allergies. Okay. Any other questions? Sarah, do you have any last minute thoughts?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for being here today and listening to us talk, and for the support of everyone. Okay, well.
All right. So we can end a little bit early. Thanks everybody for participating. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, please reach out. Again, this recording, including the presentation, will be on our website, on the Science Workgroup website page, if you will. If you go to who we are, there's a drop-down menu and it has the Science Workgroup there. And by date, it'll have the agenda as well as any kind of presentations, as well as any recordings, that kind of thing. So you should be able to find it that way. And the last meeting where we went over Tableau and our goals and objectives and how we're using it is also from the last meeting, will be there. So if there's no more questions, comments, thanks everybody for attending. I'm not sure when our next meeting is. I'm going to try to schedule another one. It's another follow-up to the lamprey discussion that we had. Can't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago. about integrating lamprey into restoration designs. We found about 45,000 amla seeds out at Staggerwald when we were dewatering. So, I mean, that's a huge amount. And so just thinking about like how much we could have lost if we had not been very intentional about trying to salvage and move lamprey at Staggerwald. I mean, if we don't start doing that in a lot of other restoration projects, then we might have a real severe loss, I guess, basically. Hey, Laura, sorry, Laura Brown. Do you have a last minute thought?
I was just going to say, have you talked to Monica Blanchard at all? She's with WDFW and U.S. Fish Wildlife Service split, and she has a really great presentation kind of on incorporating that into restoration projects and gives it willingly to anyone.
Great. Okay. I have not talked to Monica yet. So yeah, that's great. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. But I am going to try to do a follow-up meeting, and then I think our normal EMP meeting is in the fall. So our ecosystem monitoring annual results is usually in the fall. So those are the upcoming, hopefully, science work groups. So stay tuned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.